You're not suffering because of your circumstances. You're suffering because of how you think about those circumstances. Stop making excuses that life is too unfair, that you can't be happy because you don't have enough money, you're still single, or you haven't made it yet. The truth is, if your happiness still depends on other people or external achievements, then you're not living. You're renting your life out to the world and letting it decide your worth. Sounds harsh? It is. But it's also the truth. There are people with nothing who still smile with peace in their hearts. And there are the rich and famous who live like they're trapped in a hell of their own making. The problem isn't your situation, it's your perception. Happiness doesn't come when everything goes your way. It comes when you learn to master yourself, even when everything's falling apart. And if you don't learn that, you'll spend your entire life being thrown around by every gust of wind, from the first breeze to the last hurricane. This video is a wake-up call, a simple story powerful enough to crush the illusions you've been clinging to. If you're brave enough to face yourself, keep watching. But if you came here looking for comfort, this isn't it, because truth doesn't take detours. If you feel the positive energy, don't forget to like this video and share a meaningful comment. In a quiet mountain village where time seems to move slower and neighbors still sit under trees to talk in the afternoons, there lived an old woman named Edith. She was in her 80s, silver-haired, small-framed, but her eyes glowed like a warm ember in the winter dark. Everyone knew her, not for wealth or status, but because she always smiled. Rain or shine, fall leaves or winter frost, Edith stepped outside each day with a gentle smile and an oddly unshakable optimism. Villagers often saw her helping others without expecting anything in return. One day, a young woman who had just lost her job sat sobbing by the village well. Edith quietly sat beside her, placed a hand on her shoulder, and said, "If today is the bottom, then tomorrow is the way up. But if we keep digging with our tears, how are we supposed to climb out?" Over time, people stopped going to fortune tellers and started coming to Edith's home for wisdom. Some asked about marriage, others about illness. Some didn't even need advice. They just needed peace. But she never gave direct answers. She simply told stories from her own life and let the listener find their own truth. Once, after a massive storm tore through the village, roofs blown off, trees uprooted, while others were still scrambling to clean up, Edith had already cleared her yard. She cooked a huge pot of soup and placed a small sign outside her door. "If you need some warmth, come in and eat first." Her own roof had been destroyed too, but she was the first to offer help. And somehow, her spirit pulled the whole neighborhood together. People shared shingles, nails, tools, food. They rebuilt together. And someone finally asked, "How can you always be so joyful when life never seems to let up?" Edith just smiled. Not the smile of someone who has never suffered, but of someone who's suffered enough to know. Pain is a place you pass through, not where you build your home. The young man's name was Michael, 27 years old, recently back in the village after being laid off for the third time in 2 years. Once a driven marketing professional, he'd been worn down by pressure, failure, and broken promises that shattered his confidence. The city made him feel like an outdated machine tossed in the corner, and he returned to the village simply because there was nowhere else left to go. Michael had heard stories about Edith. He didn't really believe that an old woman could possibly understand the chaos of his generation, but he sought her out anyway, as a last resort, not for advice, but just to see if the rumors were true. He found her one morning, pulling weeds in the garden. She looked up at him, smiled, and nodded without a word. Michael felt a bit awkward, but eventually sat down beside her. "I heard people say you're always happy, no matter what happens. Is that really true?" "You trying to see if I'm some kind of superhero?" she chuckled, locking eyes with him. "Or are you really wondering why you can't feel that way?" Michael fell silent. She had struck a nerve. "City life made me feel like I'm always lacking money, lacking time, lacking hope. I'm tired, disappointed, and I just can't seem to be happy. So, how do you stay so calm, so positive, like nothing bad ever touches you?" Edith sat down on an old wooden chair on her porch. She wiped her hands on a cloth and stared into the distance, like she was pulling a memory from far away. Michael, no one is always positive. I've screamed into pillows. I've wanted to disappear from this world. But eventually I realized happiness isn't about avoiding pain. It's about learning not to let pain take the wheel. Life isn't a string of perfect days. It's a string of challenges, and you have to decide whether you'll live as a victim or as someone who overcomes. Michael looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't feel judged for his failures. She didn't tell him to be stronger. She didn't push him to change overnight. She simply showed him that happiness doesn't show up once everything is fixed. It comes from how you face life while everything is still falling apart. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you find this video helpful. It's the best way to support me in creating more valuable content. Edith sat in silence for a moment after Michael asked her for the secret to living happily. Her eyes drifted toward the fields where the sun was rising over the horizon, the sky a soft blend of orange and gold, like memories surfacing from somewhere deep within. And then she began to speak. You know, there was a time I didn't think I'd survive. The words came out gently, but they hit Michael like a blow. He never expected that the woman who always wore a smile had also lived through such darkness. She told him it was about 10 years ago when her husband, George, fell gravely ill. They had spent nearly a lifetime together, sharing meals, harvests, storms, and quiet nights. He was a man of few words, but he had always been her solid ground. Then came the diagnosis, late-stage lung cancer. She remembered every night sitting by his bedside, holding his hand, listening to his weakening breath like the wind slowly dying out. And one October morning, he passed. Quietly, the way he had lived. She didn't scream, she didn't cry. She simply sat and stared at the empty chair at the table, listening to the stillness in the house, feeling like half of her had vanished with him. In the beginning, I lived like a shadow, she said. I did things out of habit, but my heart was hollow. I didn't smile, I didn't cook. I didn't even open the curtains to let the light in. Everything felt meaningless when there was no one to share it with. Michael sat frozen. He had no words, nor did he want to interrupt. Edith's voice continued, slow and steady, like she was reading pages from a long-forgotten journal. One day, my youngest granddaughter came over. She was only 4 then. She ran into the house, hugged me, and asked, "Grandma, don't you want to play with me anymore?" That question hit me like a slap. I realized my sorrow wasn't mine alone. If I didn't get up, these children would grow up in a house without laughter. From that day on, Edith began to change. She didn't force herself to be cheerful, but every morning she whispered to herself, "Today, I will find one thing to be grateful for." Some days it was the sunlight breaking through the curtains. Some days it was the sound of birds at dawn. Some days it was a cup of peppermint tea. "I haven't forgotten the pain," she said, looking Michael in the eye. Her eyes shimmered, but her gaze was unwavering. "But I've chosen not to let it dictate the rest of my life." Michael bowed his head. For the first time he understood. Happiness isn't the absence of sadness. It's learning to live with it and still move forward. After that conversation, Michael didn't go home right away. He stayed in the village for a few more days. Every morning he'd show up at Edith's house to help her garden, sweep the porch, or make tea. No one asked him to do it. He just felt drawn to her presence, as if simply being near her soothed something restless inside him. He began paying closer attention to how she lived. Every action was slow but deliberate, as if each passing minute carried its own weight. And the most curious thing? She was always smiling, not a polite, superficial smile, but a deep sense of peace radiating from within. One early morning, before the sun had fully risen, Michael asked, "Don't you ever get angry or tired?" Edith chuckled, wiped her hands on her apron, and said, "Of course I do. I'm no saint. There are days when the roof leaks, days when my back aches so bad I can't lift the vegetable basket. But I've learned something. If I let one bad moment ruin the whole day, I'm giving misery control over my life." Michael paused. That single sentence hit him hard. He thought about the dozens of times he'd lost his temper because of traffic, a late email reply, a snide comment online. He had let those small things hijack his emotions for the entire day, sometimes even longer. He always blamed the world, the circumstances, never once stopping to think, maybe he could choose a different reaction. Edith told him that after George passed away, there were days when it rained all week, and her spirit felt as gray as the sky. But she set a rule for herself. Every morning, she would find at least one thing to smile about. One day, it was a wild orchid blooming unexpectedly. Another day, it was a stray cat lazily curled up in her firewood basket. And some days, nothing special happened, but she smiled anyway, because she was still alive. Just being alive isn't enough, Michael, she said. If you're alive but not aware that you're living, if you can't see the beauty around you, then you're just waiting to die. Her words hit like lightning. Michael realized that happiness didn't come from everything going right. It came from the way we looked at what's happening, good or bad. He had always believed that he needed more money, more success, a perfect life to be happy. But right in front of him was an old woman, widowed, living alone in a weathered wooden house, and still choosing to live each day with a calm, contented smile. And for the first time he began to understand. Sometimes our greatest losses teach us how to live most fully. Ever since she came back to life after losing George, Edith had built a morning ritual. Not a religious one, but a spiritual habit. She called it greeting the morning with gratitude. As soon as the sun peeked over the hills, she'd sit in the old wooden chair on her porch, close her eyes and ask herself, what am I grateful for today? At first it was simple things, a good night's sleep, hands still strong enough to make tea, birdsong at dawn. Over time, she realized gratitude didn't need grand reasons. It just needed a little awareness. From then on, every one of her days began with a sense of fullness, not of material wealth, but of emotional abundance. Michael had heard people talk about gratitude as a personal development tool, but this was the first time he saw someone truly live it, every single day. It wasn't about writing down 3 positive things before bed and forgetting them. It wasn't motivational speeches or flashy journals. It was just an old woman quietly staring out across a field, whispering silent thanks for whatever kindness the world had offered that day, and living accordingly. Were there days you couldn't find anything to be grateful for? Michael asked. Of course, she said, smiling as she pointed to a patch of weeds growing through the vegetable bed. But I still look. Even on the worst day, at least I have the chance to pull those weeds. And that's something to be grateful for, because I can still do something. Michael sat in silence. He looked back on his life, full of moments he had labeled terrible, getting fired, being betrayed, losing faith in himself. Never once had he thought about being grateful for those things. Yet now he realized they had taught him more than any of his so-called successes. Without them, he wouldn't be sitting here, listening to an 80-year-old woman teach him how to live. From that day on, he began to follow her example. Every morning, he wrote down one thing he was grateful for. Some days it was the sound of wind, other days it was silence. And some days it was simply the fact that he was still trying and hadn't given up. Gratitude, Edith told him, isn't about denying pain. It's the little light that helps you not lose your way when you're walking through darkness. Michael began to feel subtle shifts within himself after each morning spent with Edith. He no longer reached for his phone the moment he woke up. He stopped complaining about the past or obsessing over the future. He learned to slow down, not because he had given up on ambition, but because he finally realized that running aimlessly only leads to exhaustion. One afternoon, as they were replanting the tomato vines knocked over by the previous night's winds, Michael asked, "Do you ever lose patience? Ever feel like you'll never get through something?" Edith smiled, her hands still gently patting the soil. "Of course. I once tried growing lavender for 3 straight years and not a single bloom appeared. Every year I'd plant again, always hoping. People said I was wasting my time, but on the 4th year, just when I was ready to give up, they finally bloomed, and so beautifully, I cried." Michael chuckled, but something deeper stirred in him. That quiet realization that even delays have a purpose. Edith looked at him, more serious than usual. You need to understand this, Michael. Some wounds take time to heal. Not because you're weak, but because the soul can't be forced to recover on a deadline. Patience doesn't mean sitting around helplessly. It means choosing to keep planting every day, even when there's no guarantee you'll harvest anything. She told him that in the years after George died, she spent many nights awake, not out of pain, but out of memory. She missed the sound of his footsteps on the wooden floor, the warmth beside her in the mornings. But over time, she learned to let the memory stay, not to suppress it or run from it, but to live alongside it. Pain doesn't disappear, it just changes shape. And if you're patient enough, it becomes something that makes you deeper, kinder, and more understanding of life. Michael listened, his heart heavy, but no longer lost. He realized he had lost many things, but had never truly given himself space to heal. He had always wanted everything to be fast, clear, and conclusive. But true happiness, he saw now, was never a finish line. It was a journey, and every journey needs a heart patient enough not to turn back. Edith placed her hand gently on his shoulder. This time you're going through. It will pass. That's not meant to comfort you. It's just the truth. But to get there, you have to stay with yourself. Don't run. Don't give up. The day Michael left the village, the air was still. He carried a small bag in his hand, but something much heavier in his heart. A quiet transformation. Before getting on the bus, he turned to look at the little wooden house where Edith was still watering her plants, the sunlight catching her silver hair like a gentle halo. He walked over, hugged her tightly, and said, "Thank you for everything." She smiled, as softly as always. "You don't need to thank me. Just remember this, life will never be easy, but there's always something to be grateful for." Michael nodded. He understood. Life would still have bad days, failures, sleepless nights, but instead of waiting for everything to be perfect before being happy, he now knew he could choose to be happy in spite of the chaos. He was no longer the man who blamed circumstances. He was now someone who understood that happiness doesn't come from things going to plan, but from how we respond when they don't. On the bus, he pulled out his phone and typed into his notes app, "Happiness is a choice, and I'm choosing it every day." He looked out the window, and for the first time in years, his heart felt light. Not because everything was finally okay, but because he was. True happiness, it turns out, isn't something you search for. It's something that's always been there, just waiting for you to be ready to see it. Thank you for being here. If you found this video helpful, subscribe, turn on notifications, and like this video. Don't forget to leave a comment so we can spread positivity together.